back to my channel.
Bing! And it's Carly's birthday. Yay for Carly. And yesterday was Hugo's birthday. Yay for Hugo.
Happy late birthday, Hugo. Thank you.
Okay, so if you're a distance learner, you have an additional note sheet today that I have attached. We're going to do this note sheet and then some notes in your workbook. So let's get started. Last time we talked about, what did we talk about? I already forget it. Oh, sampling. So we talked about the difference between a population and a sample. I feel like we did more than that, did we? Probably not. Oh, and the different types of collecting methods. So one thing that I didn't talk about but was then in your quiz was a census. A census is when you like take the entire population. So like you survey the entire population, which is very rare. Censuses, censi, I don't know the plural of a census, is when you survey everybody in the population. So I don't know how often they do it, but I think it's the government tries to do a census to determine like our population and so forth. So sometimes people will come to your house because your parents don't fill out your census, like me and Man didn't, and then the census people came. Because you're supposed to report how many people live in your house. Not to get in trouble or anything, just because they're truly trying to figure out how many of us there are. So, census, they exist, but they're not very common. They're very rare. Okay, so last time we talked about the difference between a population and a sample and the different methods for collecting data. So today, we're going to talk about sampling methods and bias. Sampling methods and bias. So these are ways that you get your sample. These are ways that you get your sample. So the first kind of sample you can get is called a convenience sample. And it is what it sounds like. You take a sample that is convenient. So like if I wanted to take a sample about how many of you guys want to get rid of distance learning days, a convenient sample would be me just asking you guys. That's convenient because it's quick and easy. Know what I'm saying? Okay, so let's figure out what these blanks are. Choosing. Convenience sampling is when you choose individuals from the population who are easy to reach. So you're solely basing it off how easy it is to get your sample. Convenience sampling, so we're underneath here. Convenience sampling often produces unrepresentative data. So last time we talked about how if we want to know something about a population, we would take a sample because that's easier than getting a hold of the whole population. But you have to make sure that your sample represents your population. So if I wanted to survey just you guys, all you guys could represent are 11th graders. I couldn't use you to represent the entire population of students that go to Cypress. Does that make sense? So you guys are unrepresentative of all Cypress High School students because you're only 11th graders. We would need 9th, 10th, and 12th as well. So when you convenience sample, you often get unrepresentative data. You guys would be unrepresentative because, like I said, we're missing 3 other grade levels. So the bottom part gives you an example. Choosing students in the library as our sample will lead to bias. Because students who hang out in the library tend to be, okay, who's hanging out in the library? Do you guys ever go to the library? Oh yeah, because now we're like on lockdown. Well, when I was in school, the kids in the library were like the nerdy, studious kids. But since I've become a teacher, especially here at Cypress, at Matheson, not so much, but at Cypress, I swear every time I would go into the library before school, after school, or during lunch, the only kids that are in there are playing games. Computer games or board games or Nintendo Switches. Nobody's in there reading. They're all playing.
Same thing.
So, you guys, reading's the same thing?
No, I mean like 30 kids.
But they ain't studying.
Yeah, but
They're nerdy playing their video games.
Oh, so is that what we want to write? People in the library tend to be nerdy?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Whether they're in there reading and doing their homework or playing games, we would classify them as nerdy, I suppose. So if we wanted to get a sample that represents the entire population of Cypress High School students, even though it would be very convenient to just go to the library and ask those kids whatever we want to know, it wouldn't be a great idea because those kids don't represent everybody at Cypress. You're okay with this one? Convenience. The key that you're looking for is it an easy sample to take? Is it easy? Okay, next up is a voluntary response sample. So this is people who choose themselves. These people choose themselves by responding to a general invitation. So this is call in, text in, online polls. Me and Man get a bunch of things in the mail that we should mail back, surveys that we can mail back. I never do them. The one that you guys probably see most frequently is online polls. So there's actually a problem with these voluntary response samples. So people who choose to participate in such surveys are usually not representative of some larger population. Voluntary response samples attract people who feel strongly about an issue and who often share the same opinion, which leads to bias. And I'll be more specific about that in the next example. So let's talk about the strongly situation first. So every time I go in to see my doctor, regardless what I'm going for, about 2 days later, I always get a survey in the mail that says, please rate our services, and they send me a postage paid envelope to send it back. Now, most of the time my visit is fine. So I get the survey and I'm like, I ain't got time for that, and I throw it away. I bet you the only time that I'm ever really gonna fill out the survey is when I'm mad. Because the secretary wasn't nice, or because I had to wait 30 minutes before I could go in. The only time that I'm going to go out of my way to do this is if I feel strongly encouraged to do it. And that is not representative. I would not be representative of the entire population, because people who choose to respond probably are responding for a reason. Like those little kiosks in Chili's. Do you guys ever pay with those? And you can rate your server? How many of you guys only rate when you're mad? I didn't get no water. 2 out of 5. See what I'm saying? So voluntary response, you typically only choose to respond if you feel strongly. Another interesting one was, so this, back in the day when there was no internet, people would get their news from newspapers. And in the newspapers, there would be advice columnists. So I think one of them was named Miss Judy or something. So you could mail in questions to this lady and she would respond to your questions in the newspaper. So one question was about parenting, and at the end of the question that she answered, she asked her readers to respond to the question, if you could have kids again, knowing what you know now, would you? And 75% said they would not have kids again. But let's think about that. If you got some little angel kids that are never doing anything bad, then you're probably not going to take the time to write Miss Judy a letter about you would have kids again. But if your kids are little hellions and they're horrible and making you mad all the time, I bet you are sitting there writing Miss Judy a letter about how you wouldn't have kids again. So, voluntary response, no good. The second part of this where it says, this is people who often share the same opinion. So that has to do with this example here. Former CNN commentator Lou Dobbs doesn't like illegal immigration. So that's the key here. It is known that Lou Dobbs is a hater on illegal immigration. One of his shows was largely dedicated or devoted to attacking a proposal to offer driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. During the show, Mr. Dobbs invited his viewers to go to loudobbs.com to vote on the question, would you vote for a presidential candidate who supports giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens? So first of all, make a note that this is a voluntary response sample. These listeners have to go to his website to answer this question. Number 2, if you're listening to Lou Dobbs, it's probably because you're a fan of Lou Dobbs. You agree with him. If you hate his guts, why would you spend any time listening to his show? So he's probably going to get a bunch of people who answer this question that agree with him. I bet you 90% will say, no, I would not vote for this presidential candidate, and only 10% would. And that's because these people probably agree with Lou Dobbs, who does not like illegal immigration. Is this making sense? Yes? So this would overrepresent or overestimate the number of people who would not vote for, and then just draw an arrow to the question. Because sometimes your quiz is going to ask you, could this lead to an overestimate or an underestimate? And in this case, if we're using this question to estimate the number of people or the percent of people who would not vote for a presidential candidate who would give driver's licenses to illegal aliens, this is going to be an overestimate. We're going to get a high number, like 90% wouldn't vote for this president, when really, I bet you it's way less than that. Okay, next one. Under coverage. So we have two methods here that are not great. Convenience sampling, you just do it because it's easy, but often your sample is unrepresentative. Voluntary response sample, not great, because people who respond usually feel strongly. So one issue that comes from this is under coverage. When some members of your population are not represented in the sample. using convenience sampling often leads to undercoverage. So if I just ask you guys a question, we have undercoverage for 9th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. So most samples suffer from some amount of undercoverage. A sample survey of households will miss I'm trying to think of the exact words that go there. Will miss homeless people, I don't know what the next blank is, and people in dormitories. Well, a sample of households will miss homeless people, people in the military, so service member, nope, say military. And kids or students that live in dormitories. So if we're gonna sample only households, we are missing the opinion of people that are homeless, people that don't have a household because they're in the military, or kids that live in dormitories. Okay, so let's decide if this is, what kind of sample this is, if it's convenience or voluntary response, and what kind of undercoverage we would have. So suppose that a parent of a football player is concerned about proposed budget cuts to the athletic program. So a parent of a football player is concerned about budget cuts to the athletic program. So she asks 60 people at the football game if they agree with the cuts. She asks 60 people if they agree with the cuts. So what they're saying is, we want to take away money from the athletic program because maybe we want to spend it on the arts, or maybe we want to spend it on chess club. We don't want to be spending so much money on sports. So she goes to the game, the football game that her son is playing in, and asks 60 people that are there whether or not they agree. Is this convenience or voluntary response? I'm not going to tell you. So somebody should guess. Convenience. Do you think a lot of people are going to agree with the cuts or not agree? Keep in mind, these people are at an athletic event. If they're at this event, they probably support the athletic program. So do you think that they're going to agree that we should take away money from the program that they're currently supporting? Probably not. So I would say that a lot would not agree. A lot of them would not agree with the proposed budget cuts. So this is a convenience sampling. We would probably get an overestimate of those that would not agree. Making sense? Okay, next page. So if these two methods are bad, if these are no bueno, what is a good way to get a sample? So this method that we're about to discuss is the most common method that is good and works. It is called an SRS. This is called an SRS. That stands for Simple Random Sample. Convenience and voluntary response samples suffer from bias due to undercoverage. The best way to avoid this problem is to let chance, not Chance the Rapper, like random chance, choose the sample. Hat method is the easiest way to choose a simple random sample. So that's what your SRS stands for. Simple random sample. So hat method, easiest way. So here's how you would do hat method. Write names on identical slips of paper. Same color, same weight, cut the same size, folded the same way if you fold them. They have to be identical. You put the slips in a hat. You shakey, shakey, shake the hat real good. Shake up the names. Then you pull your slips out one at a time until you have the desired number of people. So it sounds silly, but hat method is the easiest method. Now you don't got to use a hat. You can use a bag. You can use a Tupperware container. But the idea is all of the possible individuals go into the container, shake the container, draw the names out without looking. This is the easiest way to eliminate some of the things that happen when you do convenience sampling and voluntary response sampling. Your head should not be down, family. Good God Almighty. Excuse me if your parents are listening. We've got a lot of sleepers in class today. Okay, so even if you sample well, because taking a simple random sample is the easiest way to get a good sample. Even if you sample well, some issues can occur. So the first one is called non-response. When an individual chosen for the sample is unavailable, or chooses not to participate. Non-response to surveys often exceeds 50%. So even when you do everything right, it's still hard to get a hold of people. So it often exceeds 50%, even with careful planning and several follow-up calls. If the people who respond differ from those who don't in a way that is related to the response, then bias occurs. So one example of this would be if we want to estimate the unemployment rate. We go to the mall on a Tuesday afternoon at 11 a.m. Are those people going to represent all people? No. If you're at the mall at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, maybe you're unemployed. Maybe you're going to get a bunch of people that are unemployed and are at the mall because they have nothing better to do. So this is what they mean by, even with careful planning, non-response could be up to 50%. If the people you actually get a hold of differ from those you can't get a hold of, you have issues. Okay, response bias. This one's my favorite one. Another type of non-sampling problem occurs when people give untruthful answers to survey questions because they can't remember or the topic is sensitive. Or maybe they misremember. People may lie about their age, income, or drug habits. They may misremember how many hours they spent on the internet last week, or they might make up an answer to a question they don't understand. So in AP Stats, we were talking about a survey where college students would have to report their binge, if they were binge drinkers, and how many drinks they typically have when they drink. But if you're a binge drinker, I'm not sure that you really remember how many drinks you truly had. I think at some point you stop counting. So even with good sampling, you could have this issue going on. Then the last one is question wording. The wording of questions is the most important influence on the answers given to a sample survey. So remember, a sample survey is when we ask people questions. Confusing or leading questions can introduce strong bias. Don't trust the result of any sample survey until you have read the exact questions. So here is a question. Does the following display wording bias? Some cell phone users have developed brain cancer. Should all cell phones come with a warning label explaining the danger of using cell phones? Yes, this would have question wording bias. And the issue is, you're starting the question with brain cancer? I mean, I think that would lead most people to like say, yeah, maybe we should put a warning on if people are getting brain cancer. What would make it better is just asking, should cell phones come with a warning label? That's it. I would even leave out the danger of using the cell phone. So those two parts are the issue. Some cell phone users have developed brain cancer. Should we explain the danger? You just want to ask, should all cell phones come with a warning label? That's it. Just ask this. We're okay on these? You're sure? Okay, so I'm going to zoom out. This whole page has to do with bias. So, two methods that are bad. These methods are bad. Why? Because we can have bias. So, we talk about undercoverage. Well, what's a good way to sample? Simplest way, hat method. But even when you sample well, you still have some issues you got to worry about. So then the last part of today's lesson is specifically on the good ways to sample. The good ways to sample. So we are going to page 98. And most of this we've already done. So don't worry if you're looking at all these thinking, I ain't got time for that. Okay, so these we're still on collecting data. The first one says, only members who are easy to reach are selected. This is a convenience sample. So the first blank is convenience sample. Only people who are easy to reach are selected. Then the rest of these come with a graphic that tries to help explain what's happening. So the next one says, members of the population volunteer to be in the sample. And notice these people have hands up, and the ones that are being chosen are colored in. So this is voluntary response. No sleeping. If you want to sleep, distance learn. Then you can fast forward through the lesson that you don't need. These two are bad. Bad. Now, right in between these two and this next one, we really should add in the simple random sample. So I'm just going to draw a little line. Because they go in order of like how good they are. That's very neon. The simple random sample would go there. Convenience sampling, bad. Voluntary response sampling, bad. Not so bad, an SRS. So, and then it goes in order of how good they are, how good the method is. So the next one, selecting every other person or every fifth person or every third person. This is called a systematic sample. You have a system for choosing who's in your sample. And it literally is every nth person. So every nth person. So every 10th person. Every third person. Every nth person. Okay, then the next two are a little bit more complicated. So you divide your population into groups that have similar characteristics and then randomly sample a few people from each group. This is called a stratified sample. Stratified sample. STRATIFIED. So you break your population into groups and you take a few people from each group. So down below, write a note to yourself. Take from each group. So one way that you could split these out, let's pretend like this is kids at a high school. These guys could be 10th graders. This group could be 11th graders. This group could be 12th graders. So each group has something that makes them similar. These are all 10th, 11th, 12th. If you want to have a sample that represents the population, you have to take a few from each grade level. You're okay? Last one is a cluster sample. So the population is broken down into groups, but this time you sample all. Okay, I ran out of space in my recorder, so I probably had a weird blip there. So when you're identifying, make sure that when you're deciding between a stratified and a cluster, this you take from each group, this you take everyone in the group. So what the kids in class are doing is identifying what these are. I'm going to walk around and see if they're actually writing stuff down, and then we're going to check our answers. What? Hugo! Good Lord. Sorry, parents, if you're watching this. Today's been a rough day, parents. All these kids are sleeping because it's hot, and they don't care about sampling. Don't worry. We'll get it figured out. Hopefully nobody's parent is really watching. You're filling out what method you use there. Out of the bajillion methods on page whatever, the other page. 98. So easy, and everybody's sleeping until we actually have to answer questions.
Which one's right for me? Is it mine or is it Diane's?
Like we need at least another minute. Answer the rest of these, ma'am. Okay, let's go 1 minute, and then we're checking in. If you don't know, make your best guess. This is exactly what your quiz is like. $45. About 30. 20. Ten. Okay, number 1, every 6th student is a systematic sample. Questionnaires, and you only use the ones that are returned, is voluntary response. Because they have to choose to return the questionnaire. You ask all the students in your algebra class, convenience. You randomly select 2 students from each classroom, cluster. Just kidding. Stratified. Sorry about that. It's not a cluster because they didn't use the word all students or every student. You use random digit dialing. This one's an SRS. It's a simple random sample. We post a survey on a website, voluntary response. We ask people as they leave the university library, convenience. We email a survey to each customer, voluntary response, because they have to choose to fill out the survey. Okay, turn the page. We're almost done. We know the top parts. Okay, so each one of these methods is biased. I'm just going to discuss each one very quickly. A news organization asks viewers to participate in an online poll about bullying. So the issue is this is voluntary response and people feel strongly. A computer science teacher wants to know how students at a school most often access the internet. The teacher asks one of her computer science classes, convenience. The manager at a concert hall wants to know how often people in the community attend concerts. So the manager asks 45 people standing in line for a rock concert. Well, this is convenience. And it's going to overestimate the amount of people that go to concerts. If you want to know how often people go to concerts, you don't just want to ask people standing in line going to a concert. These people obviously probably go to more than one. The next one is just question wording, and I think it might be helpful to identify if there's any bias. So question wording, there are issues when you lead to a particular response, or the question is too sensitive to answer truthfully. So the first one is question wording, the bottom one is response bias. So first one, maybe highlight what the issue is. Do you brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day?
Yeah.
I'm going to lie and say yes, even if I don't. So I think this one would be response bias, because I wouldn't want to admit that I don't brush my teeth every day. Does eating nutritious whole grain foods improve your health? This one's leading because they're saying nutritious foods. People will be led to say yes, it improves your health. Do you ever attempt the dangerous activity of texting while driving? I think this is both leading and response bias. First of all, they're using very strong words like dangerous, and then they're asking about something that most people would not want to admit doing. How many hours do you sleep at night? No bias. Nothing about that is weird. Do you agree that our school cafeteria should switch to a healthier menu? Leading. You never want to ask, do you agree? You don't want to start any question with, do you agree? You would just say, do you think our school cafeteria should switch to a healthier menu? Is that making sense? Okay, good luck on your quiz.